So in a good faith effort to bring a little bit more discipline to my spending, particularly on books, I decided to take a harder look at the books that I already have in my collection. And if you know anything about me, you know that I have enough books to basically start my own bookstore. Unfortunately, I've not read nearly enough of those books. So before I can buy new books, I've decided I'm going to dig into my collection of books that I already have that I haven't read, and I'm going to start reading some of those books. And as I start to check off some of those books that I've already read, then I will go and start to get some new books. But not until I start to check off some of those old books. And with that, I'm going to discuss in this video one of the books that I picked up that I decided to read that was deep in my collection that I found and was intrigued by. I'll talk about that next. So in this edition of the What Am I Reading series, digging into my collection of books that are in my collection already, but that I haven't read yet, I decided to pick up this little gem right there. This one is Perry Mason Solves the Case of the Blonde Bonanza. Now, for me, Perry Mason has always been kind of interesting because growing up as a kid, my dad was really a big fan of the Perry Mason TV show, the Perry Mason made-for-TV movies. Not sure if he ever read any of the Perry Mason books, but he was definitely a fan of the TV show and the movies. And so I grew up with a background knowing a little bit about Perry Mason and having watched the movies and some of the TV shows over the years. When I picked up this book, I was actually very intrigued to read it, and I picked this book up at a used bookstore, I believe, some years ago, and it was actually in my garage, tucked away amongst a many stacks of books that I have in my collection. So I decided to pick this one up and actually read it. And this book is, as you can see, it's a little bit of an older book right there. And it actually is 1962 that this book was written. Now, some people have a difficult time in this modern day reading books that were long before the days of mobile phones, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. But sometimes these older books can be a little bit interesting, and I thought this one was pretty interesting as well. And I read some reviews after I finished it, and by the way, I just finished it this past Sunday, which would be July the 14th. So as I finished reading it, I usually go back and forth about whether I read reviews before I actually read the book, and most of the time I actually do that, but this book was a little bit older, so I wasn't sure how many reviews that it had to its credit. But as I was charting my progress in reading the book, and I actually read it over the course of 2 days, this past weekend, July the 13th and July the 14th, I didn't actually look at the reviews until I finished charting my progress and then declaring myself finished on Goodreads. And then as I did that, declaring myself finished on Goodreads, I went and looked at some of the comments that people left describing the book. And I gave the book a 3-star rating on Goodreads. So not a 5-star rating, of course. It was a 3-star rating. And I thought, you know, maybe I'm being a little bit harsh in my critique of the book. Because I thought the book was actually interesting to me. It grabbed me right off the bat, and that's a key for me in reading and finishing any book, is that it grabs me right off the bat, and that somehow it manages to keep me going once I get to the middle and you get to that lull where I usually start to go to the 3 or 4 other books that I'm reading at the same time, which is currently the case right now. Actually, a couple other books that I'm reading right now. But I really got off to a great start with it, and knowing a little bit about the Perry Mason character from the TV shows and the movies, I was actually really intrigued to see what the book version was like and how the book version might differ from the TV version or from the movie version. And actually I saw a lot of similarities that really helped me to kind of identify with the Perry Mason character a little bit more, as well as his assistant Della Street. And so I was really excited to get into it, and I thought the story was pretty interesting. And I'm actually going to read a little bit of this synopsis on the back just to give you an idea of what this book is all about. So it starts, the synopsis on the back starts with a quote from Perry Mason. It says, "That's the damnedest contract I've ever read," Perry Mason said to Della Street. And so the description goes on, quote, "I thought you might be interested in it." The next quote is, "Why would anyone hire a girl with the figure of a strip teaser and pay her $100 a week to put on weight?" End quote. And then Della comes back and says, "In the course of my secretarial career, I've seen quite a few approaches, but this is a new one." end quote. And then Perry Mason comes back, according to the letter of this contract, if Diane Alder should marry a millionaire and her husband should die, the party of the first part would be entitled to 50%. Suddenly, Mason snapped his fingers. You've got it, Della Street said. I have an explanation. I don't know whether it's the explanation, but it's quite an explanation. And so it's really an interesting way of teasing a book, and I don't think I've seen it very many times quite like that, with some quotes and basically a conversation exchange dialogue that really teases the book. But it does actually give you an idea of what the story is about, and it is a pretty good mystery that takes place over the course of the book. It's actually a very short read. As I go back and look at it, 182 pages. So it's a really quick read. It's one of those things you can sit there, and if you're a really fast reader, you can knock it out in one setting. You can probably knock it out in about, probably one day, depending on what kind of reader you are. And for me, I'm a little bit of a slower and deliberate reader, and sometimes I go back and read things over again just to make sure I have the proper context. But I thought it was, again, a fast start. I really liked it, got into it pretty early, and it kind of dragged for me a little bit in the middle, but then it got to the trial part at the end, and of course Perry Mason is an attorney, and so everything typically ends in a trial. At least it did in the TV shows and the movies, and so I expected the book to be much the same. It kind of rushed through, if you will, the trial part at the end, and I thought that was kind of an interesting, but it was really a good story. It was an entertaining story. Again, I gave it a 3-star rating. Maybe could have gone 4, but I thought it was 3 stars was appropriate. And as I went back and I read some of the reviews, I thought that a lot of people really expressed in some ways what I was thinking as far as reading the book, and what I liked about it and what I didn't like about it. Some people had an opposite approach. I read one reviewer that thought that it started slow, but then it picked up momentum as it got to the middle and then toward the end. And I thought that's a valid argument. I could kind of see it that way too. It wasn't quite the way it worked out for me, but I could see it that way for other people. But anyway, this is a book that I picked up that was in my collection, and it's the first of many books that I'll be reading over the course of the, I don't know, maybe the rest of my life, but at least over the course of the rest of the year 2019. And so looking forward to the next one. I'm in the process of picking the next one that I'm going to read, but I'm also going to continue writing, of course, as well. But I will be looking forward really to coming back with the next installment of this, What Am I Reading Right Now? And hopefully I'll have some more entertaining stories of some maybe hidden gems that are tucked away in my collection that I will be able to discuss and bring to you in the weeks and months to come. But again, this one right here was the book that I got started on as I went through my collection. And again, it was a very interesting read. And if you are interested in courtroom dramas, old school courtroom dramas, if you will, then you might want to consider some of these classic Perry Mason books as you look to expand your collection of books and maybe delve back into times that aren't quite as modern in terms of technology as they are today. But that's what I just got through reading, and I'm looking forward to the next book and looking forward to bringing that story to you in the not too distant future.